So hello and welcome back to my C++ tutorial playlist. In this video I want to show you how to add some simple unit tests with CTest to your C++ application, and for that I will use the to-do list that we've written last time as an example. And the first thing that we want to do is to go into our CMake lists, and we need to expand that. First of all, I want to set something to make it more standard compliant. And we want to disable all the compiler extensions. Then, of course, we will still have our compiler flags, but we will need to have a new executable. We have our hello executable here, and we want to add our test executable here. So let's call this tests. Then before we create our executable, we want to enable testing. Like so, and that allows us to use the add test, and let's call this unit tests, and our executable was tests, so our command to run the unit tests is also tests. And we also, maybe let's copy this up here, and from here on, this is only for testing. Then the next thing that we want to do is to create a common header file for our to-do list, so we can include it into our tests and also into our main. And of course, this needs to be a header file and not an implementation file. So with that, I think we need to copy everything here up until the main, like so, and put it into here. Then add our pragma once. And also we could do some separation here, make it nice and tidy. I like to do something like this to annotate, to separate functions basically, so it gets easier to detect. You can also have doxygen comments up here, but I will use just something like this. I think this makes it easier to digest at first glance where everything begins, like so. And then in here we can include our newly written header, like so. And this just takes a second to process, but it found everything. Now we can do a new implementation file, tests.cpp. Same thing here. We also need to include our to-do lists, and we also need to have a main function here where we run all of our tests, and we will use basic asserts here. And I think that's all we need. One thing I would like to do is to define private as public, but this needs to happen before we include our header. So this basically lets us also test for internal member variables. So this gives us access to the description, for example, directly. So we could test for that. Then we would need to write some unit tests here. For example, test at task. And here we could think of preconditions and post-conditions and so on. But I want to keep it very, very simple. So I will just create a to-do list, and the to-do list is unknown. Why is that? Of course, this is a task list. Yeah, I have messed up the naming here a little bit. So let's name this to task list, and so this is a to-do list. And to do at task, and then std make unique, and let's create a simple task. Sorry. And this is just task 1. Make unique, and make sure it also works for important task 2. And then we would also need to make sure that it works for a regular task. And then basically we need to formulate our assert statements. And what do we need to be true? A description needs to be task 1. So we can also check for the size. So the size needs to be 3 because we've added 3 elements. Then we removed the first one, then it needs to be 2, and then it needs to be 1. And after we've removed everything, that it needs to be 0 again. And after we've passed this, we can also the print line test basic unit test like this, and then we can test add task. We can invoke it here. Test add task, and with that we have added very simple unit test, so the very simple unit test, and no source is given to tests. So let's see why that is. Tests. Oh, of course we can't have private here. It looks just needs to supply it like this. So let's build it again. And now we should have our tests here. And as we can see, we've passed the basic unit tests, and we also have the CTest plugin here, and we can see that we ran our basic unit tests here with CTest. We can do that manually with CTest. And as you can see, we've passed all the tests, and we only have one test case. This is the unit test. Yeah. And you can see how we could add more tests here. Basically, just add more tests here with this, and we would separate them into different CPP files, and which all have a main that tests something, and give them a name and add them with the add test command and so on. So let's also see how that would look if something fails. And with that, we could void failing test, and we could just do something like this, failing test. And if we now compile it again with CMake and then run CTest again, then we can see that our test has failed. And so this is a first introduction into how to write unit tests, or very simple unit tests with CMake and CTest. In theory, that's everything you need, but in the future we will take a look at how to structure tests more properly and how to use C- so you can get a nice overview and statistics over your tests, and also how to use a testing framework like Google tests, or how is it called, GG tests? Yeah. Or Catch2. Probably we will use Catch2 because I like that one. But yeah, this should give you a first idea on how to write tests. And with that, see you in the next video. Thank you for watching again. Bye bye.